Hey guys, Amanda here, Masters in Marriage and Family Therapy. We are back. I missed you guys. I missed making these videos, and so I'm just going to give it to you straight. I know, and I know you know, that you're avoiding difficult or tough conversations with your spouse. So let me ask you, is there an invisible carpet in your mind where you are constantly sweeping these challenging topics? Now, I know why you're avoiding these conversations. It's because of the outcome, the uncertainty of that outcome, the risk and the emotional exposure involved, because you have no idea what will happen after you have this conversation. This is precisely what vulnerability is all about. And it's why tough conversations seem to be the norm in most marriages these days. But here's the catch. Although these conversations are avoided and neglected, you cannot, listen to me carefully, you cannot continuously sweep dust and debris under an invisible or visible carpet without eventually tripping over the carpet. So whether you do that consciously or subconsciously, the point is, it is happening because you are avoiding these conversations. So what is under your carpet of vulnerability? I know, maybe it's that bad financial decision that you made that is going to put your family's future in jeopardy, but your wife knows nothing about. Maybe it's that addiction that you vowed to stop, but you've re-entered the "this is the last time, I promise" cycle. What about that coworker that all of a sudden you've been dressing up for to impress? Or maybe it's the frustrations that you're experiencing as a professional, personal, or as a parent. As one dad I know, when he found out that his son was born with a disability, he couldn't cope with everything that was going on. And because he kept avoiding these topics, because he wasn't willing to have these conversations with his wife, because what would she think of a man like that? And so he just had too much and he walked out. So now, reflect. What is under your carpet? And in what way do you continuously trip over it? Now, I want to encourage you today, and it is my belief, and I've seen it over and over in my experiences in therapy with couples, with families, and even in the Bible, that communication or conversation breeds knowledge, and knowledge breeds trust. And you will walk away from this video so encouraged to have these tough conversations. And yes, the outcome might be scarier, but you're going to see that not having these conversations are even scarier. There's a man I really like. I follow him on Instagram. His name is Mark Groves, and he says something brilliant. He said it like this: often what we fail to see is, of all the conversations that could potentially end our relationships, well, these are the very conversations that bring us closer together. And this is my goal, to show you, to prove to you, to give you evidence that communication will breed knowledge. Not just any kind of knowledge, but then knowledge will breed trust. So let's start with the first one, communication. Okay, Amanda, if I am going to have a difficult conversation with my spouse, I'm going to give you some tips. Now, of course, I recommend that you do this with a therapist. I recommend that you do this with a Christian therapist who shares the same principles and values that you do as husband and wife. And when you go out to pick the therapist or to make a schedule or make an appointment, do not do so without doing this first. Prepare like Esther. That is the first tip. Before anyone starts to engage in a tough communication, tough conversation, you need to do this first. What does it mean to prepare like Esther? Well, the Bible tells us that Esther, she was so beautiful that she found favor in the sight of the king. You see, the king was very upset, the Bible tells us in the story of Esther, that he summoned his wife. He was throwing a huge party to honor his kingdom and his servants. And he summoned his wife, Vashti, and she was like, yeah, I'm not going. He was so offended, he was so angry that he decided to divorce her. And so off went a decree telling everyone that he not only divorced her, but now he was looking for his new potential queen. And oh man, all the girls in the kingdom were so excited, and they got ready and they got sent off to the palace. And there, can you believe that they stayed 12 months in preparation to come before the king? And sure enough, when Esther presents herself, the king takes one look at that girl and says, she's it. He crowns her immediately on the spot. You see, Esther, though, was raised by her cousin Mordecai because both her mother and father were no longer living. And Mordecai, he was a God-fearing man, and he was the kind of guy who did the right thing, even if it brought consequences. And so Haman, here's a new character in the story. The king raised a man named Haman to power. And this guy, he was the worst. He was hubris, and he was cocky, and he was just looking for attention. And whenever he'd walk around the kingdom, he'd want people to bow down and worship him. But Mordecai, right, Esther's cousin, was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I only bow down to my living God. And so Haman was like, I can't stand these Jews, the audacity that this man has to not bow down to me. And he was so angry that he says, you know what? I am going to annihilate all of the Jews. Well, Mordecai hears this, and he doesn't know what to do. The Bible says that he rips his clothes and he's mourning, he's wailing. He tells the other Jews, and they're also just as concerned. Haman goes as far as lying to the king and saying, listen, there's a group of people, they're going against your laws, and I think we need to destroy them all. The king, without knowing too much details and just receiving those lies, says, all right, send a decree, let's kill them all. Now, here's the point where I want us to closely pay attention to. The king has chosen Esther to be his queen, but little does he know that she is also a Jew, and that in annihilating and destroying all the other Jews, well, eventually he's going to get to his bride. The king also does not know that Mordecai and Esther are related. And so Mordecai goes to Esther, and he says, listen, Esther, you need to go to the king, and you need to plead on the behalf of the Jewish people, or else we're all going to die. The date is picked. Look at this decree. Look at this letter. And now look at what Esther says. Look, Esther is talking to Mordecai, and she says, I can't do that. Mordecai, do you understand what would happen if I do this? If I go to the king without being called, without being summoned, I mean, he divorced Vashti, but you know what happens if I just go up to the king without being called, and he doesn't extend his golden scepter to me? I'm going to die. So here we go. Look, Esther wants to avoid a tough conversation because she doesn't know the outcome, and she's assuming that the outcome will be her death. And Mordecai looks to Esther. Now we're going to pick it up in Esther 4, verse 13. Mordecai says to Esther, Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. He says, listen, if you don't have this tough conversation, there's no way to avoid this situation. And it's going to bother you. So he encourages Esther, and he says, Esther, could it be that you were born for such a time as this? And so Esther, right, I'm going to say that Mordecai is her therapist here, and he is encouraging her, and he's talking to her. And Esther, ends by saying this. Verse 16, go, gather all the Jews who are present, and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. And then after the fasting and the prayer and the pleading to God, Esther says, listen, if I perish, I perish. If I die, I die. But I need to have this conversation. And Martin Luther King would say it like this: there comes a time where silence is betrayal. And it's not only betrayal to the other person, your spouse, it's betrayal to God, and it's betrayal to yourself. Esther knew that the outcome of dying would be far less worse than living with a conscience that does not have peace, with a heart that has unrest. And so the first thing you must do, because you do not get the kind of courage that Esther demonstrated. The story goes, and you should read it on your own, but that Esther eventually goes to the king. The scepter is, what's the word here? Extended to her, and there's a good ending. The people are saved. Haman, the wicked Haman, he is hung in the gallows. But because she was willing to have a hard conversation, she was willing to communicate the impossible. And so you cannot arrive at this courage, at this determination, I am sorry to say, without prayer and fasting. There is just no way. And that's why God says, trust in me. You can only trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. But you have to first go and talk to the guy. And the second way to prepare for a tough conversation is what Brene Brown, she says it's called rumble. You have to rumble with this. Now, the phone is locked here. Unlock this. I'm using Renee's phone. Well, that's not Renee's phone. That's our friend's phone. We got two cameras on me. We're using another phone. Now it's locked, but he's going to get it. Brene Brown, she is just the expert at having tough conversation. She is the researcher that, talks about vulnerability and all these things. And she says that when we have these tough conversations, that we're going to rumble in it together. She says something that I think is absolutely brilliant. She says, listen, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. So when we enter into these conversations, we need to be clear with ourselves and with the person in which we're having these conversations from. Because feeding half-truths, even to make your spouse feel better in the moment, temporarily is unkind. Talking about your spouse rather than talking to them is unkind. So remember, before you rumble, before you enter these conversations, be truthful to yourself. Have integrity to be clear, because clear is kind and unclear is unkind. Esther was very clear. She not only told the king, hey, there's someone who's trying to annihilate the Jews. No, she says, listen, Haman is the one doing it. I am a Jew myself. Help me save my people. She was clear. So now look, let's define, now that I have it here, what a rumble is. Brene Brown says it like this. A rumble is a discussion, a conversation, or meeting defined by a commitment to lean into vulnerability, to stay curious and generous. This is what powerful communication is all about. To stick with the messy middle of problem identification and solving. To take a break and circle back when necessary. This is what happens in therapy. To be fearless in owning our parts. In other words, being fearless and taking responsibility for the roles we have played to make the situation as such. And then a psychologist, Harriet Lerner, he says, to listen with the same passion with which we want to be heard. Can you imagine if all of us could have conversations like this? It would be amazing. Then she continues, more than anything else, when someone says, and maybe this is something you can apply to your family and in your marriage, she says, when someone says in her household, let's rumble, it cues them to show up with an open heart and mind so that we can serve the work and each other and not our egos. Armoring up and protecting our egos rarely leads to productive, kind, and respectful conversations. And this is from her book, Dare to Lead. And so this is the kind of conversations that, as Mark Grove says, these conversations you think would potentially end your relationships. No. They bring us closer together. So first, prepare like Esther with prayer and fasting. And then define the grounds of these conversations. It can be a vulnerable conversation. We are going to be kind. We are going to be clear. We are going to shut down our egos so that we can listen with an open heart and with an open mind. You see, remember what I said, that clear is kind, unclear is unkind. This is why feeding half-truths is not only unfair to yourself and to your partner, but it's very dangerous. Remember Abraham? Abraham was the guy who served half-truths not one time but 2 times in the Bible. The first time was when there was a famine in his land, and so he went off to Egypt. And he looks to Sarah and says, Sarah, you are gorgeous. You are easy on the eyes. And because you are, all these guys in Egypt, they're going to just want to have you. The king himself is going to want you. And so, Sarah, let's tell everyone that you're my sister, because if they know that I'm your husband, they're going to kill me in order to get to you. Abraham was avoiding a tough conversation. And what happens? What happens with his half-truth? Well, sure enough, Sarah was so gorgeous that the king actually did want to have her, but only to later find out, because of God's mercy, that, hey, this woman that you're trying to sleep with, she has a husband, and things are going to take a turn for the worse if you do not return her. The king goes to Abraham and says, Abraham, what in the world? Why didn't you tell me? Oh, I didn't tell you because I thought you'd kill me. Avoiding a tough conversation, and then he put Egypt's Pharaoh in great risk. And he does it again in the future. The same thing happens. He puts the other guy in the same risk. God could have destroyed him because he was taking another man's wife. Why? Because Abraham was not being clear. And remember, clear is kind. And finally, talking about your spouse rather than to them. Don't be calling your mom and your dad and talking bad about your spouses with all of their friends and church and in your community and at school. Don't be texting that coworker, oh, I can't stand my husband. Oh, I have to tell something to my wife, but she wouldn't be as understanding as you are. Don't do that. Rumble with the right person, and the right person is your wife or your husband. So, communication like this breeds knowledge. And Amanda, what kind of knowledge are you talking about? I'm talking about the kind of knowledge that the Bible would call the word yada, which means an experiential kind of knowledge. Not that I read it in a textbook, but I've rolled up my sleeves and I've experienced, I saw, I felt, I heard, I sensed it in my very bones. I can say it like this. The person I know best in this whole world is Renee. And why? Because I speak to him, I live with him, I eat with him, I work out with him, we rock climb together. We're constantly together, so I know his heart as well as I know my heart. And this kind of knowledge doesn't happen over time. It happens when we go through things together, through challenging and tough things together. Jackie Hill Perry, on her Instagram the other day, I'm on Instagram with all these people, but she wrote a little comment under a picture of her and her husband, and it said this: if marriage were all butterflies and rainbows, those vows would be words left untested. But it's the storms, the dark days, the hard mornings that nurtures intimacy and matures love. Couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly it. She's saying these moments, these challenging and tough moments, agreeing with Mark Groves, brings us together, brings us closer, because it gives us knowledge, deep, personal, intimate, hard, sometimes scary knowledge of one another. And that is my prayer of what will happen when you have these tough conversations. And finally, knowledge will breed trust. Knowledge breeds trust. There's a small little book in the Bible. It's called Habakkuk. And he is a prophet. And he basically comes to God with all of his doubts, his worries, his fears. He really sort of pushes God up against the wall and says, I don't get what's going on. I'm going to read it to you. And look at what he says. He just opens off like this. Talk about a guy who is not afraid to have tough conversations. It was this guy. The first line there in chapter 1 says, O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear? Even cry out to you violence, and you will not save. And so he has these long questions and conversations to God. He doesn't understand what is going on. And God is going back and forth with him. God is answering him. And he's questioning and God's answering. And it goes on like this for 3 chapters. Now, if you read the book for yourself, you will find that God does a lot of explaining, but Habakkuk doesn't get all of the answers that he's looking for. He doesn't get all the details. And can you imagine having a conversation with an infinite God? There are things that are just going to go right over our heads. And some of the ways and some of the plans of God, Habakkuk cannot quite understand. Like, wait, why do you think this is a good idea and this is the best idea? But towards the end of chapter 3, it's almost like Habakkuk just submits to God, not because now he just, okay, you know, whatever, you do what you want, you're the all-powerful God. No. He is willing and able to trust God because he has knowledge of the character of who God is. And in the end, this is why he is able to proclaim as such. Go to chapter 3 there. And the end, in verse 18 it says, start at verse 17, it's beautiful. It says this, look, though the fig trees may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord, I will joy in the God of my salvation. Communication, in the case of Habakkuk and God, bred knowledge of who God was, of the character of God, that even though he didn't understand all of the details of his plans, he could trust in the character of God. And this experiential knowledge of the person of God, that was what made Habakkuk, the title there of this part of those 3 verses called a hymn of faith. He didn't have faith in just this unknown. No. He had a faith in a living God that he just had conversations with, and it breeded the trust. And hey, I don't know all the answers, but I know enough to trust in you. And then Habakkuk could then say, I trust in the Lord with all of my heart. Now here comes the tricky part. Because one thing, Amanda, is what I hear you saying is that I trust in a God who is all good, all knowing, all wise. But another thing entirely, and you have no idea who my wife is, or you have no idea who my husband is. It's hard for me to trust in them, but you're saying a hard conversation. If I get to know who they really are, that I will then come to trust in them. How Amanda, does that work? Well, I'm going to share with you an experience that I had with a couple. And they just have been one of my favorite couples to work with. They've been just putting so much time and energy and wrestling with themselves and with each other. And when we started doing therapy together, what had happened was the husband was having an emotional affair. So husband reaches out to me and he says, listen, I'm having an emotional affair, but I'm not telling my wife and neither can you. And I said, okay. He was very scared. He was very afraid to have a tough conversation because, well, his wife had grounds for divorce. He was cheating on her. This emotional conversation involved much more things. And she had the grounds for divorce, as the Bible says, right? And so he's like, I am not telling her at all. And I said, that's fine. And I said, what are your fears? My fears is that she's going to leave me. What do you mean, Amanda? There is no good outcome in the story. And I said, okay. So we started working together and praying and fasting and seeking God. He started to work on his self, on his character, on his soul, on his values and his principles and the things that he wanted to stand for. And sure enough, just like Mordecai said to Esther, Esther, there is no way you're going to escape this. It is stamped into your heart. There is a time, right, Martin Luther King, where silence is betrayal. And sure enough, he came to session one day and he says, I have to tell her. And so I started, well, but why? Didn't you say the outcome would be scary, that she's going to leave you? And he says, Amanda, I cannot have dinner with my wife. I cannot hang out with my wife without thinking about all of the things that I have done. It's killing me inside. I cannot live this way. And then he says, much like Esther says, if I perish, I perish. If she divorced me, she divorced me. But I cannot live like this. Because he soon realized that he wasn't just betraying her, he was betraying himself. He had no peace when his head hit the pillow at night. He had no peace. He could not look himself in the mirror. When he looked himself in the mirror, he could not look himself in the eyes. God is so wise. And I knew we were going to get to this point. You know why? Not because I'm some brilliant therapist. Okay, I knew we were going to get to this point because the Bible tells us that this is the point we will get in. What do you mean, man? The Bible tells us. Well, go there. Go to Proverbs 6, verse 32. Look at what it says. Proverbs 6, verse 32. Hold on. Here we go. Whoever commits idolatry with a woman lacks understanding. He who does so destroys his own soul. Whose soul is being destroyed? The person who's doing the act, and this is why he could not go a day more without telling his wife, no matter the outcome. He was, working, and God was working in him to give him the courage to tell her because it was destroying his own. The secret was destroying his own soul. And so, sure enough, he goes to her and he tells her everything that is going on. And as you can imagine, she is very much upset. She has no trust in him. She can't believe this. Just the rug has been pulled under her feet, right? His invisible carpet has now become very visible, and everything is exposed. And I'm sitting in between them as they're having this just difficult conversation, this hard conversation that most couples would avoid because it sucks. It's not a good time. And he's weeping and she's weeping and she's asking all these questions and she's angry, understandably so. And he is ready. He is just ready because one of his greatest fears was the fear of rejection in this situation. And sure enough, after tears, after crying, she decides that she is going to stay in that marriage. And he is shocked. He cannot imagine what is going on before his eyes. He is so confused. Wait, what did you say? What are you saying to me? He goes, no, I'm willing to try, and I'm willing to work on this, and I'm willing to do therapy to see if we can salvage this marriage. In that moment, that man received grace that he thought was not possible. Remember when I said that these conversations, the very conversations that you think is going to ruin your relationships, may be the very ones that bring you closer together? That's exactly what happened. And it happened for him because for the first time in his life, he felt there is someone on planet Earth who knows the most intimate vulnerabilities, the most effective parts of my character, yet loves me all the same. Before this moment, he had not understood the love of God like his wife had just demonstrated to him. Now, I'm not saying that she had to stay. She could have very well left, right? But because she was willing to stay, amazing things began to happen in their marriage. And you say, okay, Amanda, well, he had a good outcome. What if he had a horrible outcome? Well, I'll tell you what Proverbs 6:32 says. Even if she chose to divorce him, he could not live with himself holding this secret. And when you avoid a difficult situation, what you're really just doing is prolonging the pain you are experiencing. And he was ready to stop that pain, even if it meant that his wife was going to leave him. But in this situation, the outcome was a good outcome. See, okay, Amanda, he had a great outcome, okay? You're saying he was given grace. His communication, bred knowledge, and knowledge bred trust, okay, that's great, but what about for her? Well, what was the good outcome for her, Amanda? She just got cheated on. She got betrayed. You're right. She did get cheated on and she did get betrayed. And her trust was at a negative. I said, hey, on a scale of 1 through 10, where's your trust? I didn't even have to ask her. It was at a -0. It was low, low, low. But out of this conversation, she can say today that her relationship, her marriage is better now than it ever was. Because now there's intentionality. Because now they're working together. Now they're being vulnerable with one another. Now they're sharing their fears and their dreams. They are closer now than they ever were before. And I asked her just the other day, on a scale of 1 through 10, she goes, oh, here's Amanda with her questions. On a scale of 1 through 10, where is your trust now? You know, there's some people that say, trust is the foundation of my marriage. If I don't have trust, I don't have anything. Love should be the foundation of your marriage, because if you have love, you have everything. And trust is something that builds over time. It's a process, and a process takes time. Slowly, trust began to build within her as she continuously revealed her character to him and as he continuously revealed her character to her. And we could finally find the root of that situation, where it went wrong, where he was open for vulnerabilities, where the marriage left windows that should have been closed. These windows were left open. And we started to take away these things that were pulling him away, that were putting distance in their marriage, these invisible separation that at times we create. And sure enough, she said, Amanda, right now my trust is around a 4. Is it a 10? No. Is it a 9? Absolutely not. But what makes me excited, what gives me hope, it's that it's no longer a 0. And when the husband heard that she said, you know, it's a 4, he was so excited. And then we just keep working. What can we do to make it a 4.5 and a 5? Communication is going to do that. Knowledge is going to do that, because her trust is rebuilding. Now, I'm talking here about emotional affair, but we betray our spouses in small, medium, and large ways every single day when we omit the half-truths. So I'm challenging you to prepare like Esther, to be willing to rumble with your spouse so that you can know the depths of their character, so that you have a relationship that is not a superficial variety type, looks the same as everyone else, or pretty on the outside and just dying on the inside. No. The type of relationships that Jackie Hill Perry described. The one that you had to go through stuff. But this stuff are the very things that brought you closer together. So if today, right now, you have pinpointed where you are tripping on, the financial decision, the things I mentioned in the beginning, what is the thing that you are hiding from your spouse? Take it to the Lord in prayer. And then go rumble. All right, guys, if you enjoyed this video, and I pray that you have, like, share, subscribe, send it to your friends, share it with your friends, so that together as a community, we can restore marriages. Not so that it could be mediocre, not just to be together for the sake of being together, no, but to buy into the promises of God that says, I came to give you life and to give you it in abundance. So there is no reason why all of us shouldn't be happily married. I'll see you guys next time.